Yeah, I'm Louise Wrathall. I am Director of Corporate Relations for Central Asia Metals, or CAML as we're affectionately known. And just 3 or so weeks ago, we published our first sustainability report. So I thought today I would talk to you about the process that we've been through in the last 12 months or so, since first deciding to write the first report to actually getting it published, as I say, just very recently. Hopefully you can see these slides. So the first slide is the standard disclaimer that we put in our presentations. First, I thought I'd give you a very brief introduction to our company in general. So we're a low-cost, diversified base metals producer. We've got 2 operations. We produce copper in Kazakhstan, and we also have an underground zinc and lead mine in North Macedonia. In terms of our size, we've got a market cap of around $300 million US, and we're listed on the AIM market of the London Stock Exchange. So moving on to the sustainability side of things. So before we talk about the process of how we wrote the report, actually, I think, for any company looking to go down this track, you've really got to make sure that you've actually got sustainability really embedded into your business before you can start to commit to writing a report. Because I think it would be pretty clear early on that it wouldn't have the depth required if you didn't really have this subject fully embedded in every aspect of your business. And we really do have, actually. We started producing from our first operation, Kunrad, in Kazakhstan in 2012. And in 2013, we hired our sustainability director, a chap called Nick Shirley. He's a site-based guy. He spends half his time now in Kazakhstan and in North Macedonia, really hands-on at the 2 sites. And he's been instrumental for us to make sure that we've got all the bases covered for sustainability, particularly in terms of health and safety, the environment, and what we do for the communities as well. So we've been reporting in our annual reports commentary on what we used to call corporate social responsibility, CSR, since 2013. And for many years, actually, that was sufficient for investors. I think they found it interesting and a sufficient snapshot into what we're doing, and giving them comfort that we had this important area covered. Around about 6 months ago, in November last year, we also strengthened our team furthermore by appointing Dr. Gillian Davidson to the board. She's an independent non-exec director for us. She's a very, very strong sustainability background, and she chairs our sustainability committee. So having, as I said, written commentary in our annual reports for many years, why did we decide to publish a standalone sustainability report when it isn't theoretically a requirement? And I think that the reason for that is that it became pretty apparent to us early last year, early 2019, that there was a sort of shift and a change in expectations, predominantly from the investor community. Investors nowadays, fund managers, they're under pressure to make responsible investments. There's initiatives like Principles for Responsible Investing, PRI, that many funds have signed up to. A lot of the big investment houses have got growing ESG departments, and they're ensuring performance in these areas as well. And this is actually coming from the people that invest into these funds, the likes of you and me, that increasingly want to support sustainable businesses. It's also really important, actually, to explain what you're doing in terms of sustainability to your other stakeholders as well. So governments of the countries in which you operate, NGOs, local communities close to your mines and your operations, and also your employees as well. It's really important for your social license to operate. So from the realization that we wanted and would pretty much soon have to be writing sustainability reports, how did we get started? So we did a lot of internal research, actually, and once you start looking into it, there's a lot of information out there. So first, we started by looking at what our peers were doing in this topic. Other mining companies of similar sorts of size to us, some listed on AIM, some listed on the main market of the stock exchange, and also what larger mining companies were doing as well. In the last few years, there's been an increase in the amount of independent sustainability research written as well by companies. And this research is bought by the investors. And so there's companies such as MSCI and Sustainalytics that write research on companies to explain the sustainability performance to funds. So MSCI has written some research on us, and that was very useful as well to get an insight into areas that they thought that we were strong in, and also obviously areas that they thought we could improve in as well. There's lots of other guidance from groups, external groups that are focused on sustainability, such as GRI, which is the Global Reporting Initiative, SASB, there's the UN Sustainable Development Goals as well. So you can get lots of information and understanding as to what people are reporting, and therefore what your stakeholders want to read about. On to the actual investors themselves. So a lot of the bigger funds, again, the BlackRocks, the Fidelities of this world, they actually publish their own ESG guidelines on their websites, and that sort of tells you what they expect from you in terms of the E and the S, and also in terms of the governance as well, the board composition, remuneration, those sorts of topics. So you can get quite good clarity from what some of your shareholders expect from you. And I think one of the things that we did do, which I would encourage other companies to do, is we actually went on what we called an ESG roadshow. So myself and our chairman went to see many of our larger shareholders, and we actually told them that we were planning on writing our first sustainability report, and we actually asked them what they wanted to see from us, areas that they thought we should publicise more, the sorts of disclosures that they were looking for, and some of the feedback we got from that was really quite important and helped to sort of frame our approach to this report going forward. So in order to actually get stuck into writing the report, the first step really for us, and I think for many companies really, is to undertake what's called a materiality assessment. Now for us, this was a desk-based study. We engaged in an external consultancy to do this for us. And what that means is, they analysed a huge amount of internal data that we sent to them, plus also external data, good industry practices, what our peers are doing, recommendations, etc. And from all this information, they put together a list of the most material sustainability aspects for Central Asia Metals specifically as a company. The other crucial part to doing this materiality assessment actually is a practicality. Once you've got this then starts to form a very good framework for your report. So what you can see on this slide is actually the 5 sustainability pillars, as we're calling them, that came out through this materiality assessment process. So what we do here within each of the pillars, there's sort of subsections, and on those sections is what we report. We report for each of those our approaches, we report our data as much as we can, because data, actual numerical data, is very, very important for stakeholders, for shareholders, so that they can start to compare you against your peers and compare you against your own previous performances as well. And we also gave case studies and, very, very open and honest disclosure about areas that we think we need to improve on, and areas that we think we've had also some successes in during the year as well. So I'll just go through these very quickly from left to right. We've got delivering value through stewardship. And sorry, I should also say that these will be different for every single mining company. However, simplistically, they're probably going to be broadly similar topics that stakeholders and shareholders as well are going to expect you to cover. Likewise for the topics underneath them, for how we break them down. Some of them are very obvious topics that you'll find that mining companies, you'd expect to have information on these topics. So sorry, going back to delivering value through stewardship. This is really being a good corporate citizen, good company governance. And what you're going to explain in this section really is your structure and lines of responsibility for sustainability. Wants to be clear to the stakeholder that you've got good lines of responsibility, that sustainability is the responsibility of everyone, from those working at the mine up to the board and back again as well. Risk management processes will also come into here, as will your company policies. things like code of conduct, human rights, modern slavery, and all those should be disclosed as well on your website. They should be available for people to see. Moving on to the health and safety side, from safety in particular, the stakeholders are looking for information on any fatalities or lost time injuries. They also want a frequency rate actually for those, then they can start to compare you against your peers as well. So it's that sort of data that they're looking for from the safety front. In terms of health, any occupational health issues that are being generated in your workforce by your operations, and also comments on well-being, what you're doing to improve the lives of your employees, any initiatives to try and encourage them to live healthy lives, etc. Moving on to focusing on your people, that's really your employees. So how many people you employ, how that breaks down into age groups, into local and expats, gender diversity, etc. And I think the areas there that are of particular importance is the amount of training you do for them, how you bring out the best in the teams that you've got. Local hiring is really crucial as well. That's very important, to try to encourage training and skills in the local community rather than simply flying expats in from developed countries. And also gender diversity is a growing issue and area of concern and interest for stakeholders. I think mining is viewed as a sort of industry that used to be male dominated, and there's a real push to encourage more women into the industry as well. The environment, obviously a very important topic, and we reported here on air quality, water usage, rehabilitation and biodiversity. And I think also the two key areas here that really jump out at you in this topic that investors in particular are going to want comfort on is tailings. I mean, that's been a huge area of increased focus in the last 12 to 18 months. They want to be sure that your facilities are as safe and secure as they can be. And then the other major topic, not just for mining, but globally, is climate change. Investors want your greenhouse gas emissions, Scope 1 and Scope 2, and also any initiatives you've got to try to reduce that going forwards as well. And last but not least on here, unlocking value for the communities. So what you do within the communities, the relationships you've got there, any difficulties, any challenges, social spending, and the types of projects that you support as well. Also within that will actually be local procurement, prioritising buying your supplies from the local areas, and paying your taxes, etc. It's good to show that you're generating value for the local and the national effort as well in the countries in which you operate. So I'm going to leave you on this slide, which is a few of our sustainability highlights from 2019. We chose these as we thought these were areas which would be of most interest for our wider stakeholders. And I think really just to sort of leave you with some thoughts on this whole process. It seemed pretty daunting to us to start to write this report, but I think my advice would be to any smaller companies such as ourselves looking at doing this, I really would go for it. I think the feedback that we've had from our investors so far has been really, really positive. I know that there's areas that which we can improve on for next year, and we're already working on those. We've had some constructive feedback from these investors, but the overwhelming view has been they've been really pleased that we've laid out almost like a baseline study of where we are sustainability-wise. And so we've given much greater disclosure and much more comfort really to the investors that we've got these bases covered, and that we've got good initiatives and plans in place to keep on improving in these areas as we go forward. So I think I've run on a little bit, but I'll leave it there, and I'll be happy to take any questions if anyone has any, and if we've got time.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Louise. That was absolutely fantastic, and a really, really good insight into a company as brilliant as yours, who's actually bitten the bullet and said, right, let's go for the sustainability reporting, etc. Now, I know there are a number of questions coming in and chatter going on the different channels, but a question from me, which is, when you first started putting the report together, how much of this data did you already have? versus how much did you have to go and find or start recording within the organisation?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually, because a lot of the work had been done, you know, almost behind the scenes by Nick Shirley and the team that he's got. So my first thought was, right, how much of this do we actually know? Do we need to start scurrying around measuring things? And I was really, really comforted to know that for all the areas that we initially identified, that we had been measuring these things for a long time. We did have the data. One thing we did do actually was because the greenhouse gas emissions is such a key area, to make sure that we'd been measuring that properly over the years, we actually got an external consultant in last year just to check that we were measuring and monitoring and reporting those really correctly. So that was one small change that we made. But actually, broadly speaking, we have been monitoring these aspects, and there have been priority areas for us throughout the year. And that was really interesting from the materiality assessment. Definitely the right thing that we did. But I think comfortingly, it didn't really throw out anything that we didn't already know in terms of what our priority areas were. And they were the bases that we were largely covering.
Brilliant. Thank you, Louise. And to that as well, I guess just building on that question, is there anything that, say, the investors look for, or the different sort of almost reporting frameworks look for in terms of numbers, that, to be completely frank, isn't actually all that useful to you as a company? So you're just having to collect the numbers to tick a box in a way, rather than using it to actually help drive decisions deeper within the organization?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I would say that all the aspects that we've reported on and the data that we have been reporting has all been areas that we've felt are material to us. I think going forward, one thing we think we could look towards doing next year or the year after, actually some of this will be COVID-19 dependent, is whether to work towards actually reporting to a set standard, be it GRI or SASB. And that may bring in some more of the aspects that you're mentioning. I think there's more sort of boxes to tick per se, whereas this really was our work, our material topics, and really we just put forward what we felt was important. But I think there's probably growing areas from the investors, etc., that they'll want more disclosure on in the future. And I guess one of those is probably going to be Scope 3 emissions. And that's not a track that down which we've yet gone, but I suspect it will be only a matter of time before that's a new area of focus. So I think that's probably one example of your question that you're asking.
Brilliant. Thanks, Louise. And one final question, which we will just sneak in here, and this comes in from Karen. And she's asking, can you tell us more about how you developed your priorities, i.e. to what extent was there consultation with your workforce or internal engagement, and this front loading on ensuring the understanding from the bottom up? How can that support engagement, ownership, performance at operational site levels, as opposed to being the top-down directive?
Yeah, no, it's a very, very good point, actually. So we've done stakeholder engagement work and studies, particularly in North Macedonia, because we bought that mine 2.5 years ago. So we've done a lot of work there. We also feel we've got a strong understanding of that in Kazakhstan. We've got regular meetings with employees. We've got regular meetings with community members as well. And we feel like we have got a strong understanding of what they want. But Karen's question is very valid. And one thing we're looking towards doing potentially this year, again, COVID-19 dependent, is to almost take a step back and do a full stakeholder engagement questionnaire process. And I think that would really push home, the actual bottom-up approach to really double check that the areas that have been deemed material by all the work that's been done, in part, that's based on some of these stakeholder engagements that we've done in the past, but really to double check that those topics are the ones that are deemed material by the employees, the communities, the governments, shareholders, etc. So that's definitely a track that we want to go down, hopefully this year, but there'll be some practicalities in that given flying restrictions, etc.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Louise and Nigel. who had an easy ride of it. Nigel, unless there's any final comments you'd like to make before we go to our next presenter.
No, I think Louise done an excellent job of presenting the company and what we've done and the focus we've had on this over the past few years. Well, or as Louise said, from 2013. So it is in the fabric of the company, but it's good that we make a start externally publicising what we do. And this is a growing trend that's not going to go away. We all know that, and you've got to embrace it to, enhance the value of the company, really, amongst all your investors as well as potential new investors. Because without it, I think you're going to fall behind a little bit in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant.